welcome to chapter 12 of Emil and the Detectives. If you can remember correctly, we are now in the hotel and the Professor and Emil have come up with a plan and Gustav has left them. And we found a little bit more about Emil's relationship with his mother. And now we're going to think, I would think with the lift boys, two lift boys in green, that we're going to make some connection with people who work in the hotel, but I'm not sure. Let's find out. Chapter 12, Two Lift Boys in Green. A detachment of the reserve forces appeared in the courtyard about 10 o'clock, bringing with them enough sandwiches to feed a regiment and asking for further instructions. The professor was furious and told them they had no business to come unless they were sent for. "I told you to wait at Nicholas Square," he reminded them, "until Trout brought you word from telephone headquarters." "Don't be so shirty," said Peters. "We were dying to know how you were getting on. Besides, when Trout didn't come, we were afraid something must have happened to you," said Gerald by way of excuse. "How many boys are still at Nicholas Square?" Emil asked. 3 or 4, replied Frederick the First. "About 2, said Gerald. "If you ask them again, they'll say there's no one there at all," cried the professor angrily. "Who do you think you are, shouting like that?" exclaimed Peters. "I propose that Peters is expelled from the Corps of Detectives and not permitted to take any further part in the case," said the professor, stamping his foot. "I'd be sorry if you had a row on my account," said Emil. "Let's take a vote, like they do in Parliament. I propose that Peter is let off with a caution. Of course, we can't have people running off on their own whenever they feel like it." "Stuck-up load of pigs," said Peters. "I'm going anyway," and he stamped off, muttering something very rude indeed. "It was his idea," said Gerald. "We'd never have come otherwise, and we left Maya to hold the fort." "Let's just forget it," said the professor quietly, returning to his usual manner. "We'll say no more about Peters." "What shall we do? What shall the rest of us do now?" asked Frederick the First. "I suggest you wait till Gustav comes back from the hotel with his report," said Emil. "Good idea," said the professor. "Look, isn't that lift boy coming now?" "So it is," Emil agreed. A boy in a green uniform, with a cap on the side of his head, paused under the archway and waved to them. "Smashing uniform," muttered Gerald enviously. "Have you got a message from our scout? That is, from Gustav?" called the professor. The boy nodded and came nearer. "Well, what is it?" Emil asked impatiently. Suddenly a motor horn honked, and the boy in green danced about, roaring with laughter. "You old idiot, Emil," he shouted. It was Gustav himself, not the real lift boy. "You!" exclaimed Emil in amazement, and they all laughed so hard that somewhere up above them a window was opened and a voice yelled to them to be quiet. "Oh, well done, Gustav," said the professor. "Now quiet, all of you, while we hear all about it." "It was simply marvellous," said Gustav. "I slipped into the hotel and saw the boy waiting by the lift. So I caught his eye, and over he came to see what I wanted. Then I told him the whole story from A to Z, about Emil losing his money, and about us, and about how the thief was staying at the hotel, and that we have to keep an eye on him so that we can go after him tomorrow and get the money back. He thought it was no end of a lark, and said he'd got a spare uniform I could borrow, and with that I could pretend to be a second lift boy." "What about the hall porter?" I asked. "Won't he mind?" "Not he. He's my father," he said. "I don't know what story he told his old man, but I got the uniform all right. What's more, he said I can spend the night in an empty room there, in the servants' quarters, and bring one of you with me. How's that, eh?" "Did you find out which room the thief is in?" asked the professor. "Some people are never satisfied," exclaimed Gustav. What do you think I've been doing all this time? It wasn't all that easy, and you haven't heard half of it yet. The boy thought the thief was in room 61 on the 3rd floor, so I went up and spied out the land a bit. No one saw me. I made sure of that. Then I tucked myself out of sight behind the banisters, and after about half an hour, the door of room 61 opened, and out came our thief. I recognised him at once. I had had a good look at him while I was watching him at the cafe this afternoon. Little black moustache, thin sticking out ears, and a face ugly as sin. He went to the toilet, and as he was coming back, I touched my cap and said, "Will you be wanting anything more, sir?" "No, nothing," he said, and then he called back to me, "Wait a minute, though. Yes, ask the porter to call me in the morning at 8 sharp, room 61. Don't forget." "Very good, sir," I said. "I won't forget," and I was thrilled. "You'll get a phone call at 8 o'clock precisely," I said. That's the way people call at the hotel. He just nodded and didn't suspect a thing. Then he went on back to his room. "Excellent," said the professor, tremendously pleased, and so were the others. "We'll be waiting for him with a guard of honour from 8 o'clock onwards, and as soon as he appears we'll go after him and have him in the bag in no time. He's as good as caught already," laughed Gerald. "No flowers by request," said Gustav. "Well, I must be off. I've a letter to post for room 12, and I've got sixpence for taking it. Easy money, this job. The regular lift boy says he sometimes picks up as much as 10 bob a day in tips. I'll get up to about 7 to make sure our thief's called to time. Then I'll report back here." "I'm so grateful to you, Gustav," Emil said earnestly. "Now everything will be all right, and we can all go to bed. Tomorrow we'll catch the thief, and there'll be nothing to do till then. Is there, Professor? No, everyone can go home to bed, but be sure you all get back here promptly at 8 tomorrow morning. If anyone can get hold of any money, it would be a great help. Now, I'll ring up little Tuesday, and he can rope in anyone else who reports tomorrow as extra reserves. We've still got to track the man, and anything may happen in the process." "I'd better be the one to sleep in the hotel with you, hadn't I, Gustav?" asked Emil. OK, I'll expect you'll like that. It's not at all a bad hole." "I'll go home as soon as I've phoned Tuesday," said the professor. "I'll send Maya home too. Otherwise he'd sit about in the square all night waiting for orders. Now, is everything clear?" "Yes, Chief," said Gustav with a laugh. "Report back here promptly at 8 a.m, said Gerald. "Don't forget about the money, if you can raise any," Frederick I reminded them. They all said good night, then, like businessmen, solemnly shaking hands all round, and went their various ways. Gustav and Emil went into the hotel. The professor crossed Nollendorf Square to the telephone box in the restaurant. 1 hour later, all were asleep, most of them at home in their own beds, but 2 in a small room on the 4th floor of the Hotel Cried. Little Tuesday, tired but true to his charge, had fallen asleep in his father's armchair beside the telephone. Trout had gone home, but Tuesday would not leave his post and sat on, dreaming of hundreds of telephone calls. At midnight, when his parents came home from the theatre, they were very surprised to find him asleep there. His mother picked him up and carried him to bed. He hardly stirred, but murmured drowsily, "Password Emil." And that is the end of chapter 12, and we're moving on to chapter 13, which is called Crowd Tactics. And again, each time I read out the title of the next chapter, it of course leaves everybody thinking, what could that chapter be about? Because obviously the title is giving us a bit of a clue, Crowd Tactics. So I've got a bit of an idea, but I'm not going to spoil it. I wonder what you think crowd tactics might mean in the next morning once Mr. Grunt Eyes gets up. Let's wait and see. I'll put the next chapter on tomorrow, but for tonight I hope you have a good evening, stay safe, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.